All right. I don't want to jinx it, but the third time might be the charm. I need to get to this 10-second mark before my screen goes black. Okay. I think we're live. And I think the connection is working this time. So, hello. Welcome to this live weekly Q&A. Even if nobody shows up to watch, okay? I have a whole list of questions that people have submitted across various platforms, which is pretty cool. Speaking of platforms, I'll probably turn my phone on silent so that nobody ends up calling me, text me, whatever. But I am going to check and see if there were any additional questions that happened on Instagram. They may not have. Actually, I do have a question. Cool. So, I do want to lay a few things out about these lives before I get too deep into it. But like the first thing to know is that I am not the total expert on all things raising crickets. So I will share with you my answers and my thoughts on based on my experience of raising a caged domesticus for almost 4 years now. It is not the only way that you can do things. I do things very differently than other people in the industry. So don't feel like it is my way or the highway and my stuff is the only option, because it's definitely not. And something that I might be doing today on my farm or one of my partner farms, and what I recommend today may not be the case 6 months from now. We may, and hopefully we have, developed better practices to further progress the industry as a whole. And something that works for me efficiently may not work for you efficiently, whether it be as part of your facilities or just the way and the style that you like to work in. So just want to throw that out there. The other thing is I do want these to be as interactive as possible with nobody watching at the moment. Obviously, it's still me talking to myself, which is weird, but is also what I do on YouTube videos regularly, although it doesn't feel this weird. But should we get people that actually end up joining this stream, I do want people to feel comfortable with asking questions, and there are no dumb questions here, none whatsoever. So please don't ever feel like your question is too basic or too low of a level to, warrant asking it and getting an answer. Because sometimes even the most basic of questions are something that I haven't necessarily thought about, and it gives me a good aha moment of, hey, I need to go look at this. The best way to learn sometimes is to teach. So with that being said, I do have 9 questions that I printed out from Facebook, YouTube, emails, just things that I've gotten in the last week, either on the posts where I advertised that I was going to do this live video, or from people reaching out to me via email or via Facebook Messenger, any of the above. So I'm going to go ahead and start with those. And if anybody hops on and ends up having a question, please do not hesitate to ask that question. And if you are watching this at a later time, later date, whenever, and you have a question, drop it in the comments. I'm not deleting this video after the stream goes up. There will be 2 other videos of a live stream that I failed on because rural internet and very unstable connection. It would let me connect, and then it would say that my connection was unstable, and I would see my face, and then the screen would go black and it wouldn't come back up. And I don't know the YouTube platform and going live well enough to be able to troubleshoot that in real time on the same live. So I basically just did the equivalent of turn it off and turn it on and see what happened. So I had to do that 3 times. This is my 3rd live stream in the last 11 minutes. And this is the first successful one that I've had more than 10 seconds of being able to see video. So I think we're making progress. But so I will start with question number 1, as they are on my list, and these didn't really necessarily come in any particular order, but this just happens to be when I copy and pasted stuff on here, this is how it's going to go. And if, like I said, if you end up asking a question in the chat, if you're not comfortable with asking a question, don't feel like you have to. But if you are, if you end up asking a question in the chat and we don't get to it tonight for whatever reason, because 8 o'clock is about my bedtime, sorry about it, we will save it for next week. And again, if you are watching this at a later time and you want to drop the comment in, we will get to it on a different weekly Q&A. So first question is, what do you do to keep the crickets from overbreeding? And what do you do with excess eggs or pinheads? Should you get them? First off, again, this is going to be from the viewpoint of me raising a Keto domesticus, so the common house cricket in the middle of central Iowa. So my rules and regulations may be different depending on where you are in the world. So you may want to check out what all of the parameters that go around that. But first of all, what I do want to say is if you are getting extra pinheads, so you are hatching enough crickets to replace your initial population plus some, that is a really, really good sign for you as a cricket farmer. That is usually the first indication for me, when I bring an outside grower on, of how good of a grower they're going to be, is how quickly they can get to excess pinheads. Now, it's not a 100% foolproof rule that if you can't get to extra pinheads that you're not going to be any good. But my growers that have been really, really good and have really figured it out, if you will, are the ones that figured out how to get more pinheads than they ever needed. So that's a really good sign if you are to the point where you have too many pinheads. There's a few ways that you can deal with it. If, let's say, you have pinheads that have hatched out and eggs that are still incubating and you are at capacity, go ahead and take those pinheads and stick them in the freezer and leave them in there for way longer than 24 hours. I don't really have a good timeline of how long exactly it takes to kill them off, especially if you're raising a Keto, though. They do not tolerate cold temperatures, which is why they're a non-invasive species here in North America. Part of it is it gets too cold, and part of it is our native cricket species are much larger. So that's how it works out. But so an easy way to do it if they have not hatched yet is to put them in the freezer. And likewise, if the pinheads, let's say that you have like a super hatch of pinheads that happens on a particular day, and you fill out your barn or your shed or your room, whatever you're growing the crickets in, and you just have way too many pinheads, you can also just put those pinheads in a container and stick them in the freezer, and that will take care of them that way. I'm not going to tell them you can go dump them in the field, but so probably don't do that. Put them in the freezer, or I know, or I've heard over in Thailand, they use things like burn bins where they like burn the excess substrate. I don't know that you necessarily need to do that, but that's another way to dispose of them too. So, first of all, like I said, really good sign if you're getting that many excess pinheads, but the freezer is going to be a tool. You could probably do it in the fridge too, because an extended period of time at 50 degrees or below, well, typically fridges are 45 and below, is going to probably, it will absolutely kill the pinheads that have been hatched, but it'll probably kill the eggs as well. But that is something that we do mess around with, and I experiment with often. When I have excess eggs, I look at cooling those eggs, so putting them in the fridge or the freezer and seeing how long I can go and still get pinheads to hatch. Like I said, there is an upper limit to that. I don't have a really definitive answer, but I can tell you for sure that if you leave them in there for more than a month, they are not going to hatch. I had to try that. I'd never tried it before. But if you, let's say you wanted to space out your population, you could put some of your eggs in the fridge. So don't freeze them all the way through, but in the fridge for a few days. Pop them out, incubate them at a lower temperature, and that's a good way to stagger your population. So yeah, that's what you can do with overbreeding. And then, so I suppose I should address the overbreeding thing. If you get really, really good and really, really predictable results every single time that you are hatching out pinheads, don't breed your crickets as much. If you are currently breeding 20% of your total crickets and you are ending up with 5x the amount of crickets that you need, cool, then drop down to 10% or 5%. Just don't breed them as much. It's not foolproof, and there's other ways to deal with excess, but that's what I would do. Second question. So this one came in the comment section of last week's live Q&A test. Hopefully get out all of the kinks, but I obviously didn't get out all of the kinks because this is my third live of tonight. Can you grow fat-producing insects that are keto friendly? So this is a really interesting question. You can. Crickets are not optimal for that in terms of a ketogenic diet. Typical medical ketogenic diet, I'm pretty sure, is 80% fat. So 20% protein and carbs essentially is what it takes to be a medical keto diet. So with crickets being 64% protein, that can bump you out of ketosis pretty fast with that higher protein, with the protein then being converted to glycogen. So crickets are not the answer necessarily for fat-producing insects, but there are higher fat insects out there. Many of them come in a larval stage. So those tend to be really high fat. But if you think about it, that's when there's a lot of development going on for those insects. And so those insects are really high fat because they need those energy stores to be able to grow and develop and do all of those things. So things like palm weevil larvae, cicada nymphs, the cicadas that are not fully emerged, anything that is essentially kind of like a baby, or I know that's not the technical term. I'm not an entomologist. So anything that's in the larval stage is going to be higher fat. So that could potentially be a good keto-friendly option as far as insects go. Crickets are definitely not. They're really high protein and they are low carb, but they are not keto. Is it true insects that eat green? No, I feel like I should not read that whole question out loud, so I'm not going to. I don't know what you're talking about, Matthew Smith Undercover. If you would like to clarify your question, I would be happy to answer it. Anyways, so that was the second question. So crickets are not, like I said, not a good keto option, but there are other options out there. Third question. I am overwintering a cricket and I'm worried about feeding it fruits and vegetables. Is there something else I can feed it? And so this worry is specifically about the pesticides that might be coated on the fruits and vegetables that would may not impact you as a human being, but it may impact an insect, which is going to be way more sensitive to chemical levels than something you ever would be. So something that you could feed it if you can access this and get your hands on it is a non-GMO or an organic chick starter. Or chicken feed. Chick starter preferably because they tend to be higher in protein. You want to find some sort of a chicken feed that's at least 20% protein, but not a whole lot higher than that. So chick starters tend to be higher protein because baby chicks need more protein to develop and everything that way. But you're going to want non-GMO or organic, similar to the reasons that you are worried about feeding that cricket any sort of fruits and vegetables. You're going to want to have something that you're fairly confident that there's not a ton of pesticides on it. So I hope that helps. You can absolutely supplement with the fruits and the vegetables if you want. But again, probably stick to organic or chemical-free if you can find it. So number 4. Your cricket castle seems to be a shipping container. It seems like it, but it's not. So my cricket castle actually used to be a single-wide mobile home trailer. it was going to go to the landfill. We looked at doing a shipping container, but in terms of usable space, shipping containers just don't have as much. Probably has half or less than the single wide. So dimensions wise, because that's the next question, what are the dimensions of my cricket castle? It is, I'm trying to think of how high it is inside, because it's a peaked roof, but like at the edges, I'm pretty sure it's 8, maybe 9 feet tall. But then it is inside, it is 11 by 54 or 11 by 53. Can't necessarily remember the length, but it's definitely 11 feet wide on the inside, and it's just under 12 feet wide on the outside. And that's so that it can be transported down the road. So it's the same width as a typical single wide mobile home. Same length as well, so it's built on the same chassis. But like I said, I'm pretty sure it's 8, maybe 9 foot tall. That I would have to verify. And like I said, it's a peaked roof at the middle, so not that helps, but so it's somewhere around 600 650 square feet. You could do the math on it. It's just not something I can remember off the top of my head. So question number 6, going back to pinheads. Do you have the ability to determine the approximate weight of a pinhead cricket? So interesting fact about the weights of insects. They are very, very impacted by the hydration level of the insect. And hydration levels can be impacted by relative humidity of the environment, access to water, anything kind of like that. The weight, what I'm trying to say is weight is not really a reliable measurement of a pinhead, because I think why you're asking this question is you are trying to figure out some way to weigh out pinheads so you have some sort of guesstimation of what your population density is or how many pinheads you have. So at all ages, weight is not necessarily a great indicator. Volume is a better indicator. So the one time that I estimated the weight of pinheads, I took a gram of pinheads and I froze them, and then I individually counted them. It ended up being like 1,325 pinheads, give or take. So it's probably somewhere around there. So probably somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500. That's a lot of variation, but again, it's just it is very condition dependent and hydration dependent in terms of weight. So I would figure out some sort of volumetric measure and go from there. So I, give or take, what I generally put in my bins at the moment is about 1 fluid ounce of pinheads. So you just measure that with and that's like 30 mils, maybe, somewhere like that. US, we are not on the metric system because it makes too much sense. So we do 1 fluid ounce at the moment, and that seems to work fairly well. But you did miss the info on feeding the nymph that you're overwintering, but I can cover it real quick again. So kind of like I said when I replied to your comment, if you can find some sort of either organic or non-GMO chicken feed that is somewhere between 15 and 20% protein, that cricket will be quite happy with that. Then you can supplement with your fruits and vegetables if you want, but it's not something that they definitely need. The one thing that I will say is definitely make sure that you have some sort of a water source in there. And one thing to note on the water is if you are on any sort of like city water here in the US, or if you're like on rural water, anything that's not a well, basically, you need to let that water sit out before you give it to your cricket. Water in the US, and probably water everywhere else too, is actually chlorinated. That's the way that it gets treated. At the water treatment plant, there's chlorine in it. If you leave it out, though, it just evaporates and it's no big deal, but that chlorine will kill your crickets or make them sick. They will not be healthy. So it's one thing to make sure. You've been giving him bottled water. Is that okay? Now that one I'm not entirely certain. Again, if you just wanted to do a really easy way to test that, easy way to fix that is whatever water you're giving him, even if it's bottled water, just pour it in a cup or pour it in a dish and let it sit out on the counter for a few hours. Like, it won't take very long. If you were doing gallons, I would tell you, leave it out overnight or leave it out for 24 hours and the majority of it will have evaporated. But that's just a good way to be safe. It's just something to note on whatever water you're giving them. If you're not going to put it through any sort of filtration system or anything, which is fine, you don't need to. It doesn't need to be like a fancy solution. Just be aware that the chlorine is not good for your crickets. So I think you should be all right with the bottled water, but just to be safe, just let it sit out. Okay. The weight of the pinhead. Somebody else had a question too. Would horsehair worm parasites not be such a problem with farmed crickets? Oh man, I'd have to Google what a horsehair worm parasite is, but I can imagine about what it is. And I imagine it's the ones that everybody tells me about where when they step on the field crickets outside, the native crickets here in Iowa, when people step on them, they all have a story about this little worm coming out of them. I got to imagine that's what a horsehair worm parasite is. So parasites are kind of a reality of all farming. I don't think that they're necessarily super avoidable, and we don't have the veterinary tools to get rid of them in our crickets that I know of yet. So yes, my gut instinct is yes. Farmed crickets are not going to, gut instinct and just reality of it is they're not going to have as many parasites because we're controlling what they're eating. Oftentimes, like, parasites happen because of, take other livestock, for example. Pigs get parasites because pigs eat everything. Rotten things, fecal matter, like everything. So that's how parasites happen in pigs, because they eat a lot of things that are just And then if you look at just like the animal kingdom, predators, so like bears and lions and mountain lions and all of those things, they all end up with parasites because they're eating another animal that has a parasite. So theoretically speaking, as long as whatever you're feeding the animal doesn't have a parasite, where's the parasite going to come from? So while I cannot give you a super definitive answer on whether or not horseworm parasites in particular are as big of a problem with farmed crickets, my guess and my gut feeling is they're probably not, because we're controlling what they're eating. So that helps. Okay. What crickets do you fill in your bin, and what are the dimensions of these bins? So the bins that we use, typically, I vary. Sometimes I have these 18-gallon bins that sometimes I use, and you try to get anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 crickets in one of those 18-gallon bins, to varying degrees of success. There's a lot of things that impact that. So those 18-gallon bins, like I said, 3 to 5,000 in an 18-gallon. What I typically use in my grow out bins are 50-gallon bins, or they are 50-gallon bins. And if you can get between 5,000 and 7,500 in one of those, you're doing really well. There is a rule of thumb that a friend of mine uses, that if you can get to 1 pound of crickets produced per square foot of grow out space, you are probably doing pretty well. The goal for my growers is always to get to 0.5 pound per square foot of your grow out space. And I mean like the square footage of the bin, not like the square footage of your facility, because you can grow vertically. But so that's kind of a good rule of thumb. So I would say any sort of projections or anything you're doing, if you are looking at it from a per pound basis, start with like 0.5 pound as your projection, just on the conservative side. Hopefully, like, you figure it out and you can get above that 1 pound mark per square foot of grow out space. But like, just realize that it's going to take you a while to get there. We're all kind of making this up as we go along. So kind of along those lines, I'm curious about the general max capacity in relation to box size, of course, and what you have experienced to be the best in terms of colony size. There is no good, like, answer to this. The population densities, the carrying capacities of your grow out space, of your grow out bins, varies so wildly on so many different conditions, from your air quality to your within the air quality, like gas exchange, like ammonia exchange, just general stressors. Like, is there a presence of predators? Like, do you have spiders? Do you have, like, mice will eat crickets? Like, there's so many things that can stress the crickets out. And so how well are you managing those stressors? What kind of feed are you feeding them? How much access to that feed do they have? Are you putting like 1 feed tray in per 50-gallon bin? If you are, you're stressing the crap out of your crickets. They need more feed than that. They need more feed availability. How much water access do they have? Do they have water access at the right times? Like, so many different things go into that equation as to, like, what is your max capacity. So kind of like I said on the last one, whatever you're thinking for projections. So let's say you're crafting like a business plan. Whatever you're thinking for your projections, back it off massively to whatever you've heard. I would say a good safe rule of thumb, like I said, is figure out, I don't know, you'd have to do the math on square footage per 50-gallon bin or whatever. But if you're looking at that, half a pound, assume half a pound. You should be able to hopefully get to half pound production per square foot. That is pretty realistic. So the other thing I didn't touch on there is surface area availability. So whatever you're using for your housing, whether it be egg flats or cricket condos or beer bottle separators or whatever, there is a limit to that in terms of you need, the rule of thumb is 2 square centimeters per cricket to prevent cannibalism. Yes and no. That doesn't mean that you can infinitely increase your surface area in a 50-gallon bin and expect your increase in production to be linear along with that. Like, it just doesn't work that way, because again, you're not factoring in your gas exchange, you're not factoring in your feed availability, your water availability, all of these other factors that go in. So just be really conservative in your estimates of what you think the carrying capacity of your actual grow out space is. That's my one suggestion there. And what do you use? Well, if you feel comfortable discussing your food supplement blend, curious what sort of recipe you're going with and its general nutrition values. So general nutrition values, I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that it is, can't remember if it's 20 or 22% protein, one of the two. It contains animal protein in it. It's a non-GMO blend. The one that I use personally in my barn comes from a company called Bioforge Labs. It's about 7 miles down the road, so it's really local to me, and they're really high quality. So it's an insect diet that's blended specifically by a biologist. He is a trained biologist and does feed for all sorts of different animals. Really interesting person. But so it's a, like I said, non-GMO with meat insect diet. So it has a mix of different grains. He adds the supplement stuff to it. I have the label somewhere. And if you are really curious, you can reach out to him and he'd probably be happy to share with you what that is. Or maybe not. I don't know. You might have to be a customer in order for him to share the label. I don't know how that works. I just know that he's local and he's great and the feed is really high quality. I have growers closer to a different feed mill, to an organic feed mill. So those growers, we use an organic chick starter and mix in some pork meal, which is dried up pork meat. And that tends to work really well. So again, shooting for that 20% protein ratio. You don't really want to go too much higher than that. It just ends up being counterproductive and expensive. Protein is expensive. So yeah, do adults eat nymphs? They do. So that's one thing about crickets is they are opportunistic omnivores. Given the opportunity, they will eat other insects. And as far as crickets go, if it's smaller, it's a meal. So they will eat the nymphs. So that's why if you are going to have different ages, I don't recommend mixing them. So let's say that you are keeping crickets for your reptile and you are breeding those crickets. If you have freshly hatched pinheads, don't put those in with the remainder of your breeders or some older crickets. Like, it's just going to be a recipe for disaster. Yes, so repeat the info on the feed. It comes from Bioforge Labs in Ankeny. I don't know that, and actually, I'm pretty sure he doesn't. He only sells it in 50-pound bags. So I don't know if that is, for one cricket, that would be a little bit excessive. There's no way that would work. But it's Bioforge Labs in Huxley, Iowa. And then 10-gallon tank and found an adult, but was worried about putting them in the tank together. So if you found an adult and you have a smaller one, I don't know that I would necessarily put them together. It's not, the cannibalism issue is not as big though if they have adequate food and water. If the resources are plenty and you have enough surface area for them, so something for them to crawl on, whether it be cardboard or egg flats or any of those things, then they should be fine and they shouldn't eat each other. Now, as soon as I say that and you put them together, watch it eat the little one. You're safer to keep them separate, but I don't know. Cool. I think, oh wait, I had one Instagram question. And I'll check and see if I had more than just that one. Okay. Let's see if I can find it. Do you ever have crickets that get sick? Yeah, good call. Just keep them separated. It's probably easier that way. So this question, do you ever have crickets that get sick? So crickets do get sick. They are susceptible to viruses just like any other animal. We don't have the same risks at a cricket farm that you would at like a hog confinement or a hog farm. So when you go to a biosecure facility, which are like what these hog confinements are, you shower in, they give you full clothes all the way down to your undergarments and everything else. Like, you shower in and then you go into the facility and then you shower out when you come out. And that's because we can give pigs the flu and vice versa. The pigs can give us diseases and we can give the pigs diseases. So there's nothing like that for crickets or basically any other, well, I mean, there are for other insects, but nothing like that for crickets. No disease risk, human, whatever. I don't know the correct word for it, but we don't have any risk of giving the crickets some sort of a flu or something like that, and the crickets don't have any risk of giving us the equivalent. So yes, they can get sick. A common one that's talked about is the cricket paralysis virus, or the denso virus. Zoonotic, that is the word. Thank you. I could not think of it. So yeah, it's called the denso virus, cricket paralysis virus. It affects them when they're like 3/4 grown or something like that, and your like whole population is wiped out. It's an airborne virus that sticks around for like 6 months to a year. You cannot get rid of it once you have it, so it basically means death to your entire colony. That's why a lot of the commercial cricket breeders who raise for like feed on a large scale switched to the banded cricket because it's more hardy. But common house cricket tastes better. So, and I like their chirp better. So I'll take that risk. As long as we don't bring in outside insects, specifically outside crickets, it's not something that is a giant risk for us. That being said, like there's way more viruses other than that one, and there's bacteria and other things like that that can impact it. So you do have to always be mindful of that. But right now, it would almost scare you the amount of things we don't know about raising crickets and the things that can actually impact them as far as viruses go. I'm part of a study right now where I'll actually send live crickets this week so we can test them and see what they have, because we just don't know. There's so much research to be done in this field. So yeah, there was a second part to that question too. Sorry, excuse me while I do this. Second part to that question is, do they just die or can you fix the actual issue? So that, in some cases, they just die. Like I said, the cricket paralysis virus, there's really no coming back from that. You'll have a few survivors maybe, but not a lot. In terms of fixing it, usually if you have a mass die-off, it's an indicator of a bigger problem. If you haven't brought in any new feed, new water, new insects, like there should be no reason for that. So then you have to then go back and look at, did something change in the feed? Did something change in the water? Is there an infestation of something? Is there an uptick in predators? Like what could have possibly caused this? So there's kind of a little mental checklist you need to go through. So mass die-off can be because of viruses, or it could be something environmental, like humidity was too high, humidity was too low, it got too hot, it got too cold, like all of the things that can go wrong, that might cause it. Does that virus affect mammals? The denso virus? Oh, as soon as I say no, I'd probably Google it and we'd find out that it does. Because it does kind of sound somewhat familiar, doesn't it? I don't know, is my only answer to that one. So I'm not entirely certain if the denso virus affects mammals, or if it is even like the same strain. I don't know, is my short answer to that one. And then I was just going to check one more time on my Facebook to see if anybody had dropped any questions there, and it does not look like they have, but let me look at one more place where I posted it where I might have questions. Otherwise, I think my rats, so maybe I'll move them just in case. Oh no, I really don't think that it's a cross-species risk with the rats. If you want to do it just to be safe, that's fine. But if you are keeping that room warm for your rats, like the crickets will be happier in there. Crickets like it warm. So if it's a choice between leaving them in the room with the rats and keeping them warm, or taking them out and having them be cold, definitely leave them in the room with the rats. I think your risk of that would be super, super low. Nope, the other one was just a guy telling me that he started breeding his crickets with my help, and he's got 50 plus lizards, and that's what they eat off of. So very cool. So yeah, I think that will probably be it for this live. But if you've made it through all of this, thank you for dealing with all of my technical difficulties. Like I said, this is my third stream of tonight to finally get to this one where I could see my face and I could interact with people. Man, rural internet is a struggle. So I think we'll probably do this again next week. I might move it an hour earlier to 6 p.m. Central Time and maybe it's just because it's daylight savings, because I am tired right now and it is not even 8 o'clock. So we'll do it again next week. If you missed the live this time and you have questions, please drop them in the comments, or you can send a message to me on Facebook, Instagram, any of the above, and I'll get it written in, and we can do it again. But anyways, thank you guys for coming. Thanks for tuning in, Bill. Appreciate it. And until next week, have a great week, guys.